Harold Blackwell stood in stunned silence, staring at the magazine cover. His weathered hands trembled as he held the glossy pages featuring a photo of his humble honey stand. The words, "America's Hidden Treasure," were emblazoned across the top. 3 days ago, he'd been contemplating selling his family farm. Today, there was a line of luxury cars stretching down his dusty driveway, and a woman from the Food Network was asking if he'd consider being on television. All because he'd offered a small jar of honey to a quiet stranger in a sundress who'd seemed interested in his bees. Little did he know, that stranger was Elise Chevalier, the most influential food critic in the world. As Harold looked up at the crowd gathering outside his farmhouse, one thought kept repeating in his mind. How could something so sweet change a man's destiny so completely? Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The morning Harold Blackwell offered honey to the stranger had begun like any other day of slow, grinding poverty. He woke before dawn, the familiar ache in his lower back, a testament to 23 years of working the same patch of land his father had worked before him. The small family farm in western Tennessee had never made anyone rich, but it had sustained generations of Blackwells through good seasons and bad. Until now. Harold swung his legs over the side of his bed and reached for the reading glasses on his nightstand. The stack of bills had grown taller overnight, or so it seemed. The drought had devastated his corn crop for the second year running. The bank had sent another letter, the third one this month, with words like foreclosure and final notice circled in red. His calloused fingers traced the embossed letterhead of Mid-State Agricultural Bank as dawn light filtered through the threadbare curtains. Well, he muttered to the empty room, at least the bees don't need rain. The beehives had been his wife Marjorie's idea. 8 years ago, before cancer took her, she'd read an article about the declining bee population and had convinced Harold to diversify. "Honey's drought-proof," she'd said, with that practical wisdom he'd always admired. "Bees will find flowers somewhere, and people always want something sweet." She'd been right about that at least. The honey production was the only part of the farm still turning a profit, albeit a small one. Not enough to save the place, but enough to keep the lights on for another month or two while he figured out what to do next. Harold shuffled to the bathroom, wincing at his reflection. 53 years old, and looking 70. Gray hair thinning at the temples, crow's feet carved deeply around eyes that had squinted into too many summer suns. His father had worked this land until he was 82. Harold had always assumed he would do the same, passing the farm to his son James as it had been passed to him. But James was in Nashville now, with a computer job and a fiancée who thought rural Tennessee was something to escape rather than preserve. Harold couldn't blame him. Why chain yourself to a failing farm when the world offered so much more? After a quick shower and a breakfast of toast and coffee, Harold pulled on his faded overalls and headed out to check on the beehives. The morning air was already thick with humidity, promising another scorching day. His boots crunched along the gravel path that led past the withered cornfields to the back acre where 25 white boxes hummed with activity. This was Harold's favorite place on the farm. The gentle buzzing of thousands of honeybees going about their business soothed him in a way nothing else could. He'd come to understand their complex society over the years, developing a respect for their industriousness and sacrifices. Each bee lived only a few weeks during summer, working itself to death for the good of the colony. There was something noble in that, Harold thought. Something worth preserving. He suited up in his protective gear, lit the smoker, and began his inspection routine. The bees were doing well despite the drought. They'd found wildflowers along the creek bed and in the untended meadows of neighboring farms. The honey production was steady amber-colored jars, filled a shelf in his workshop, their contents glowing like liquid gold when the light hit them just right. By mid-morning, Harold had harvested 3 frames of honeycomb and was in the process of extracting the honey when he heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Visitors were rare these days. The farm was 5 miles from the nearest town, and Harold wasn't exactly a social butterfly. The last person to drive up had been Jackson from the bank, coming to discuss options in person after Harold had stopped answering their calls. Harold set down his tools and peeled off his sticky gloves. Through the workshop window, he could see a sleek red rental car parked beside his rusted pickup truck. A woman emerged, shielding her eyes against the relentless sun. She wasn't from around here. That much was obvious from her linen sundress and oversized sunglasses. A tourist, probably, who'd taken a wrong turn off the highway. Harold stepped outside, wiping his honey-sticky hands on a towel. "Can I help you, man?" The woman turned, startled by his voice. She was in her early 40s, Harold guessed, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and skin that suggested Mediterranean ancestry. There was something refined about her, from her posture to the way she tilted her head as she considered him. "I'm sorry to intrude," she said, and Harold detected a hint of a French accent. "I was driving by and noticed your sign for local honey." She gestured toward the faded wooden board Harold had nailed to a tree by the roadside years ago. He'd forgotten it was even there. "You're interested in honey?" Harold asked, surprised. Most locals bought their honey at the supermarket these days, not caring about the difference between mass-produced and small batch. The woman nodded. "I'm somewhat of a food enthusiast. I'm traveling through the region and trying to experience authentic local flavors." She extended her hand. "I'm Elise, Harold Blackwell," he replied, shaking her hand. "Well, you're welcome to try some if you'd like. I was just extracting a fresh batch." Harold led her to the workshop, suddenly self-conscious about the peeling paint and cluttered countertops. He'd never cared much about appearance's function over form. Was the farmer's way, but something about this woman made him wish he'd tidied up. Elise seemed not to notice the workshop's shabbiness. Her attention was entirely focused on the gleaming extraction equipment and the frames of honeycomb waiting to be processed. "You do this all yourself?" she asked, watching as Harold resumed his work. "Yes, ma'am. Been keeping bees for about 8 years now." He cranked the handle of the extractor, sending the frames spinning. Centrifugal force pulled the honey from the cells, spattering it against the stainless steel walls before it trickled down into the collection tank. "It's a small operation, but the bees do good work. May I?" Elise gestured toward the observation hive Harold kept in the workshop for educational purposes. It was a single-frame hive behind glass, allowing visitors to see the inner workings of the colony without disturbing the main production hives. "Of course," Harold said, pleased by her interest. Most people glanced at the bees and moved on, but Elise studied the glass intently, watching the workers tend to the queen and the dance of the foragers as they communicated the location of nectar sources to their sisters. "Fascinating creatures," she murmured. "So organized, so purposeful." "They each have a job to do," Harold agreed. "And they all work together for the good of the hive. Wish people were more like that sometimes." The honey had finished draining into the collection tank. Harold opened the spigot to fill a small glass jar, which he handed to Elise. "Here, try this. It's from the early summer blue mostly clover and wildflowers." Elise held the jar up to the light, examining the color and clarity of the honey. It was a rich amber with golden undertones, neither too dark nor too light. She unscrewed the cap and inhaled deeply, closing her eyes as she processed the aroma. Harold watched, bemused. He'd never seen anyone take honey so seriously. "You can taste the difference in each batch," he explained. "Spring honey's lighter, more floral. This summer batch is bolder. By fall, when the goldenrod blooms, it'll have a deeper, almost spicy note." Elise dipped a small tasting spoon into the jar and brought it to her lips. Her expression changed instantly, eyebrows raised, eyes widened. She seemed momentarily lost in the experience. "This is exceptional," she finally said. "There's a complexity here that's quite remarkable. Notes of wildflowers, yes, but also something earthy underneath. And the texture perfectly balanced between viscosity and flow." Harold blinked, unsure how to respond to such a detailed assessment of his honey. Most customers just said it was good and asked for the price. "Well, thank you," he said. "The bees do all the real work. I just help them along. Don't underestimate your role, Mr. Blackwell. The beekeeper's methods influence the final product significantly." She looked around the workshop, taking in the handmade equipment and the careful organization of the harvesting tools. "How long has this farm been in your family?" "4 generations," Harold replied, a note of pride creeping into his voice despite his efforts to remain casual. "My great-grandfather started with 50 acres back in 1891. We're down to 38 now, but it's still Blackwell land." Something in his tone must have revealed the precariousness of his situation, because Elise gave him a thoughtful look. "And will it stay Blackwell land for a 5th generation?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Harold turned away, busying himself with wiping down the extractor to hide his expression. "That remains to be seen," he said carefully. "Farming's not easy these days, especially for small operations like mine." "I see." Elise seemed to sense his discomfort and changed the subject. "Do you sell your honey commercially?" "Just locally. Farmers market in town on Saturdays, and I supply a few small groceries in the county. Nothing big." "That's a shame. This product deserves a wider audience." "Oh," Harold laughed, a short, self-deprecating sound. "Well, I appreciate the compliment, but I'm hardly set up for anything larger. It's just me here, and I've got my hands full keeping the place running as it is." Elise nodded, her expression unreadable behind her sunglasses. She reached into her purse and pulled out a crisp $50 bill. "I'd like to purchase 3 jars, please." Harold started to protest as honey sold for $10 a jar at the farmer's market, making the total $30, but something in Elise's demeanor suggested that arguing would be futile. "Let me package those up for you," he said instead, selecting 3 of his best jars and placing them in a small cardboard carrier. He added a 4th jar as a bonus. "This one's from the spring bloom. Different character altogether. You might enjoy comparing them." Elise accepted the carrier with a nod of thanks. She seemed about to say something else, then glanced at her watch and frowned slightly. "I should be going. Thank you for your time, Mr. Blackwell, and for sharing your exceptional honey." "My pleasure," Harold replied, walking her back to her car. "Drive safely now." As the rent car disappeared down the dusty road, Harold found himself wondering about the strange woman who'd paid more than double the asking price for his honey. There had been something almost analytical about her interest, as if she were cataloging every detail for future reference. Well, at least he'd made a decent sale. $50 wouldn't save the farm, but it would buy groceries for the week. He returned to his workshop, the encounter already fading from his mind as he focused on the more pressing concern of how to make his next mortgage payment. The bank had given him 30 days to come up with a plan or face foreclosure proceedings. He had exactly 27 days left to perform a miracle. The week that followed was consumed by Harold's increasingly desperate attempts to find a solution to his financial problems. He called his son James in Nashville, hinting at the severity of the situation without actually asking for help. Pride was a stubborn thing, and Harold couldn't bring himself to admit the full extent of his troubles. "The farm's weathered worse," he told James, forcing a confidence he didn't feel. "Don't you worry about your old man. I've got some options on exploring." Options was a generous term for what Harold actually had. A meeting with a real estate developer who was buying up failing farms in the area to build vacation homes, and a half-formed idea about selling off 10 acres to a neighboring farmer who'd expressed interest years ago. Neither prospect appealed to him. The farm had been whole under his watch for 3 decades. The thought of being the Blackwell who broke it apart was almost unbearable. Saturday found Harold at the farmer's market in town, his small booth set up between Mrs. Peterson's homemade pies and the Johnson's organic vegetable stand. Business was slow, as it had been all summer. The drought had affected everyone, and luxury items like artisanal honey were the first to be cut from tight budgets. By noon, Harold had sold only 2 jars, and he was considering packing up early when Sheriff Dave Riley stopped by. "Morning, Harold," Dave said, examining the honey display with interest. "How's business?" "Could be better," Harold admitted. He'd known Dave since high school. They'd played on the same baseball team, though they'd never been close friends. "You here on official business or just browsing?" Dave picked up a jar, turning it in his hands as if the answer might be found in the golden liquid inside. "Bit of both, maybe. Heard anything about a journalist in town? Foreign lady, asking questions about local food producers?" Harold's thoughts immediately went to Elise, the woman who'd visited his farm. Might have met her. he said cautiously. French accent? Dark hair? Drives a red rental car? That's the one. Dave nodded, looking relieved. She stopped by the station yesterday, asking for directions to some of the older farms in the county. Said she was writing an article about traditional food production in rural America. She didn't mention being a journalist when she visited me, Harold said, frowning slightly. Just said she was a food enthusiast. Well, according to Mandy at the Hillcrest Motel, she's some big-shot food writer from New York by way of Paris. Mandy Googled her after checking her in. Dave leaned closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. Apparently she's pretty famous in food circles. Writes for all the fancy magazines. Harold shrugged, unimpressed. Fame doesn't count for much around here. Maybe not, Dave conceded, but exposure might. Tourism board's been trying to get food writers interested in the county for years. Could bring in visitors if she writes. Something nice. The conversation shifted to local gossip, and Harold soon forgot about the journalist, as more pressing concerns consumed his thoughts. By the end of the day, he'd sold only 5 more jars of honey, barely enough to cover the booth rental fee. Sunday morning dawned clear and hot, the humidity pressing down like a wet blanket. Harold was on his knees in his vegetable garden, salvaging what he could of his tomato plants, when he heard a vehicle approaching. Multiple vehicles by the sound of it. He stood, wiping soil from his hands, and walked around to the front of the farmhouse. A caravan of cars was making its way up his driveway at least 6 vehicles, ranging from practical sedans to a sleek black SUV that looked ridiculous on the rutted farm road. What in the world? Harold muttered, automatically counting the days until the bank's deadline. They wouldn't send a crew to start foreclosure procedures this early, would they? The lead car, a silver Mercedes, pulled to a stop near his porch steps. A tall man in his 30s emerged, his city clothes-pressed khakis and a blue button-down shirt incongruous against the backdrop of the weathered farmhouse. He approached with the confident stride of someone accustomed to being welcomed wherever he went. "Mr. Blackwell?" he called out. "Harold Blackwell?" "That's me," Harold replied warily. "What can I do for you folks?" By now, people were exiting the other vehicles, a mix of men and women, all with the same polished, urban appearance. Some carried cameras or notebooks. "William Hargrove, Mr. Blackwell, food editor for Southern Living magazine." The man extended his hand, which Harold shook after a moment's hesitation. "We were hoping to speak with you about your honey production." Harold stared at him blankly. "My honey?" "Yes, sir. After Elise Chevalier's review in Gastronomie Mondiale, we're very interested in featuring your operation in our Hidden Treasures of the South series." Harold's confusion must have been evident, because Hargrove's expression shifted to one of surprise. "You haven't seen the review? It was published online yesterday. Print edition hits newsstands tomorrow." "Don't have internet out here," Harold said, increasingly bewildered by the situation. "And I don't subscribe to whatever that magazine is." Hargrove reached into his messenger bag and pulled out a tablet. A few taps later, he handed it to Harold. "Here, see for yourself." The screen displayed an article titled, "America's Honest Flavor, A Journey Through Forgotten Foodways." The byline read, "Elise Chevalier, Senior Food Critic." A large photo showed Harold's weathered sign by the roadside, with the farm visible in the background. Harold's eyes widened as he scanned the text. In an age of mass production and corporate food systems, authenticity has become the most precious and elusive of culinary qualities. I found it last week at the end of a dusty road in western Tennessee, where 4th-generation farmer Harold Blackwell tends to his bees with the quiet dedication of a man who measures success not in dollars, but in the perfect balance of sweetness and complexity. Blackwell Farm honey is nothing short of revelatory, a testament to traditional methods and an undisturbed ecosystem. The summer harvest captures the essence of American wildflowers in a way that can only be described as visceral. Each spoonful tells the story of the land, the resilience of native blooms despite punishing drought, the industriousness of honeybees who travel miles to collect nectar, and the patience of a farmer who understands that excellence cannot be rushed. In a blind tasting against 23 premium honeys from around the world, Blackwell's artisanal product outscored competitors selling at 10 times his modest price. The clarity of flavor, perfect viscosity, and lingering complexity place it firmly in the realm of luxury food products, though Blackwell himself would likely scoff at such categorization. This unpretentious elixir represents what I consider the most honest taste of America, born of hardship and perseverance, unmarred by commercial considerations, and produced by a man who seeks not acclaim, but simply to continue a family legacy that spans over a century. The article continued, but Harold couldn't process anymore. His hands trembled slightly as he returned the tablet to Hargrove. "That woman who stopped by last week," he said slowly, "she was Elise Chevalier? The one who wrote this?" Hargrove nodded, clearly amused by Harold's bewilderment. "Only the most influential food critic in the Western Hemisphere. Her column, in Gastronomie Mondiale, can make or break restaurants overnight. When she writes about a product as favorably, well, that's why we're all here." As if on cue, another vehicle pulled into the driveway, a van with the logo of a local TV station emblazoned on its side. "Mr. Blackwell," a woman called out, hurrying forward from one of the other cars. "I'm Sophia Chen from Gourmet Quarterly. We'd love to do a feature on your beekeeping methods for our November issue. Would you be available for an interview and photo session next week?" Before Harold could respond, another voice chimed in. "Charlie Peterson, Tennessee Tourism Board. We'd like to discuss including your farm in our new Taste of Tennessee promotional materials." The requests kept coming, one after another, until Harold had to hold up his hands to stem the tide of voices. "Folks, I appreciate your interest, but this is all coming as quite a surprise to me. I'm going to need some time to wrap my head around it." Hargrove nodded sympathetically. "Of course, Mr. Blackwell. But if I could just ask a few quick questions about your honey production capacity? Our readers will want to know where they can purchase your product." "Production capacity?" Harold repeated, momentarily stunned by the implication. "I've got 25 hives. I sell at the farmer's market and to a couple of local stores. That's it." The assembled journalists exchanged glances, and Harold could read their thoughts as clearly as if they'd spoken aloud. "This is even better than we expected. The authentic, small-batch producer who doesn't even realize what he has." "Mr. Blackwell," Hargrove said, his tone shifting to one of gentle persuasion, "you may want to reconsider your distribution strategy. After this review, demand for your honey is going to increase dramatically. We'd be happy to put you in touch with some specialty food distributors who could help manage that growth." Harold looked past the crowd of eager journalists to his farm. The peeling paint on the barn, the withered cornfields, the ancient tractor that needed more repairs than he could afford. 27 days until the bank took wall. "It all away. Maybe we should talk," he said finally. "But not all at once, and not before I'd had my coffee. Why don't you folks come back in an hour? I'll answer what questions I can." The journalists agreed readily, dispersing to their vehicles with promises to return. Harold watched them go, still unable to fully comprehend the sudden change in his circumstances. As the last car pulled away, he sank down onto his porch steps, overwhelmed. "Marjorie," he whispered to the empty air, "you wouldn't believe what's happening." His wife had always been the optimistic one, quick to see possibilities where Harold saw only obstacles. She would have embraced this unexpected opportunity without hesitation. Harold could almost hear her voice. "See? I told you the bees would save us." He allowed himself a moment to imagine what she would say if she were here. She'd be practical. First and foremost, making sure he didn't get carried away by promises before seeing results. But she'd also be excited, already planning how to expand a honey production without compromising quality. "One step at a time," he murmured, echoing her favorite saying. He had 1 hour to prepare for the media onslaught. 1 hour to decide how to, quote, leverage this sudden attention into something that might save the farm. 1 hour to transform from a failing farmer into, what? A artisanal honey producer? A rural entrepreneur? Harold shook his head, smiling despite his anxiety. Whatever happened next, at least it would be more interesting than foreclosure. By the time the journalists returned, Harold had changed into his cleanest shirt, brewed a pot of coffee, and set out honey samples on the porch. He'd also called his calm son James, leaving a message that tried to convey the bizarre turn of events without sounding completely unhinged. "Son, it's Dad. Something strange is happening here. Good strange, I think. Call me when you get this." The next 4 hours were a blur of questions, camera flashes, and increasingly grandiose promises from people who seemed convinced that Harold's honey was about to become the next big thing in the culinary world. He, quote, tried to maintain a level head, answering honestly about his beekeeping methods and deflecting questions about expansion plans with non-committal responses. "I'm just focused on maintaining quality," he repeated, whenever talk turned to increased production. "These bees have been good to me. I won't do anything that might compromise their health or the honey they produce." This sentiment, he discovered, was exactly what the journalists wanted to hear. Every declaration of his commitment to traditional methods and small batch production was met with approving nods and furious note-taking. By mid-afternoon, Harold had given 3 on-camera interviews, posed for countless photographs, and accumulated a stack of business cards from people eager to help him maximize this opportunity. His head was spinning from the attention and from trying to reconcile his new reality with the dire financial situation that had consumed his thoughts just hours earlier. The last vehicle to leave was the black SUV, which had arrived later than the others. Its occupant, a sharp-featured woman in her 50s with the air of someone accustomed to getting her way, had introduced herself simply as Margot, Culinary Connections. "Mr. Blackwell," she said as she prepared to depart. "I represent several high-end restaurants and specialty food shops in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. My clients are very interested in exclusive distribution rights to your honey. Here's my proposal." She handed him a sealed envelope. "Review it at your leisure. I'll call tomorrow to discuss details." Harold nodded, adding the envelope to the stack of business cards and brochures that had accumulated on his porch table. "Thank you, ma'am. I'll give it some thought." Only after all the visitors had gone did Harold allow himself to truly process what had happened. He sat on his porch swing as the sun began to set, turning Margot's envelope over in his hands. Finally, curiosity overcame caution, and he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of heavy cream-colored paper with an embossed letterhead. The proposal was straightforward. Exclusive distribution rights to Blackwell Farm honey for 3 years. Minimum purchase of 5,000 jars annually at $35 per jar wholesale, with a $50,000 signing bonus. Harold's breath caught in his throat. The numbers were staggering. At his current production level of roughly 2,000 jars per year, he couldn't meet the minimum requirement without significant expansion. But the financial terms over $200,000 annually, plus the signing bonus, would not only save the farm, but transform his entire operation. He set the proposal aside, suddenly worried that he was getting ahead of himself. One review, no matter how glowing, didn't guarantee lasting success. The food world was notoriously fickle. Today's culinary darling could be tomorrow's forgotten fad. His cell phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was James. "Dad? What's going on? Your message sounded weird." Harold chuckled, realizing how difficult it would be to explain the day's events. "It's a long story, son. But the short version is that a famous food critic tried my honey last week, wrote about it in some fancy magazine, and now I've got people offering to buy every jar I can produce." Silence on the other end. Then, "Are you feeling okay, Dad? Do you need me to come out there?" "I'm fine, James. I know it sounds crazy, but it's real. I've spent the whole day talking to journalists and food industry people. One woman just offered me a $50,000 signing bonus for exclusive distribution rights." Another pause. "Seriously? Your honey is that good?" "Apparently so," Harold said, still unable to fully believe it himself. "This Critic Elise Chevalier, she compared it to some expensive imported brands and said mine was better." "Wait, Elise Chevalier? The Elise Chevalier?" James's tone shifted from concern to excitement. "Dad, she's like the most famous food critic in the world. Angela follows her column religiously. Angela was James's fiancée, a marketing executive whose interest in upscale food and wine had always seemed somewhat foreign to Harold. "I guess that explains all the fuss," Harold said. "Look, I'm still trying to make sense of all this, but I wanted to let you know. Things might be changing around here." Wow, Dad. That's amazing." James sounded genuinely happy, and Harold felt a warm glow of pride. "Do you want me to come home this weekend? I could help you sort through the offers, maybe look over any contracts before you sign anything." Harold hadn't expected that. James hadn't visited the farm in months, always too busy with work or social events in Nashville. "That would be great, son. I could use your help with all this, and it would be good to see you. I'll come Friday evening. Angela might join me. She'll flip when she hears about this." After hanging up, Harold sat on the porch until darkness fell, contemplating the strange twist his life had taken. Just that morning, he'd been resigned to losing the farm. Now, he was fielding offers that could secure its future for years to come. As the first stars appeared in the night sky, Harold found himself thinking about Elise Chevalier. He wondered what had prompted her to visit his obscure little farm in the first place, and why his honey had impressed her so deeply. He wished he could thank her for the unexpected gift she'd given him, not just financial opportunity, but a renewed sense of purpose. Most of all, he wished Marjorie could have witnessed this unlikely turn of events. "You were right about the bees," he whispered into the darkness. "They found a way to save us after all." The next morning, Harold woke to the sound of vehicles on his driveway again. This time, it wasn't journalists but customers. Locals who had read about his honey in the Sunday edition of the county newspaper, which had picked up the story and run a front-page feature titled, "Local Farmers, Honey Receives International Acclaim." By noon, Harold had sold every jar he had on hand, including the ones he'd been saving for the next farmer's market. People who had walked past his booth for years without a second glance were now eager to purchase what was suddenly being called the best honey in America. Mrs. Abernathy, who taught third grade at the local elementary school, summed up the general sentiment as she purchased 3 jars. "We always knew you made good honey, Harold. It's about time the rest of the world figured it out too." Harold accepted their congratulations with awkward grace, still uncomfortable with being the center of attention. When the last customer had gone, he retreated to his workshop to take stock of his remaining inventory. The shelves that normally held dozens of filled honey jars were almost bare. Harold had exactly 17 jars left, not nearly enough to meet the immediate demand, let alone fulfill any of the wholesale orders being discussed. Expanding production would be necessary, but that would take time. New hives needed to be established with care, and the bees required several months to build up honey stores. His phone rang again, the 5th call that morning, from an unknown number. This time, it was a producer from a national morning show, asking if Harold would be interested in appearing as a guest to discuss Carafe, the artisanal honey that's taking the culinary world by storm. "I appreciate the offer," Harold said, "but I'm not much for television appearances. I'm just a beekeeper trying to keep up with sudden demand." "That's exactly why our viewers would love you," the producer exclaimed. The authentic, humble producer who cares more about his bees than fame. It's a perfect story. Harold politely declined, promising to reconsider if things settled down. He had barely hung up when his phone rang again. This time, it was Sheriff Dave Riley. "Harold, you might want to know there's a bit of a traffic situation developing on the road to your place," Dave said, his tone a mix of amusement and concern. "Word's spreading about your honey, and folks are coming from all over the county. I've had to station a deputy at the turnoff to direct traffic." "You're kidding," Harold said, moving to his front window. Sure enough, he could see a line of cars snaking down his normally deserted road. "Dave, I don't even have any honey left to sell them." "Might want to put up a sign then," Dave suggested. "Save these people a dusty drive for nothing." Harold thanked him and quickly made a sign on a piece of cardboard. "Sold out of honey, sorry for the inconvenience." He placed it at the entrance to his driveway, then returned to the house to avoid the disappointed looks from would-be customers. Inside, he found himself staring at the stack of business cards and offers that had accumulated the previous day. The rational part of his brain knew he should start making calls. exploring the various opportunities that had suddenly presented themselves. But another part, the part that had spent decades maintaining the rhythms and traditions of the farm, resisted the idea of fundamental change. His gaze fell on Margot's proposal again. The terms were generous, no doubt about that. But exclusive distribution rights meant relinquishing control over where his honey was sold, and to whom. The farm had always operated on direct sales, herald to customer, with no middlemen. There was something satisfying about that direct connection, about seeing the appreciation on people's faces when they tasted his honey for the first time. Then again, $50,000 would not only save the farm from foreclosure, but allow for significant improvements. He could repair the barn roof, upgrade his extraction equipment, and still have enough left over to establish new hives for expanded production. Harold picked up his phone and dialed the number on Margot's card. She answered on the second ring. "Harold Blackwell," he said, surprised at the steadiness of his voice. "I'd like to discuss your proposal, but with some modifications." Margot's tone was professionally pleasant. "I'm listening." "I can't meet your minimum requirement of 5,000 jars annually, not right away. I'd need time to expand my operation, and I won't compromise on quality to speed things up." "Understood," Margot replied. "What time frame are you thinking?" 2 years to reach full capacity. I could probably manage 3,000 jars next season if I start establishing new hives now and ramp up to your target the following year." "That's reasonable," Margot said, and Harold could hear the sound of typing in the background. "What other modifications did you have in mind?" Harold took a deep breath. "I want to maintain the right to sell directly at local farmers markets and from the farm. Not a large percentage, say 10% of total production, but it's important to me to keep that connection to the community." There was a pause, and Harold wondered if he'd overplayed his hand. But when Margot spoke again, her tone was thoughtful rather than dismissive. "We can work with that. Our clients are primarily interested in exclusivity for retail distribution beyond your local area. Direct sales from you to local customers don't compete with their markets." Another pause, filled with the clicking of keyboard keys. "Would you be open to a 5-year contract instead of 3? In exchange for the longer term and the production ramp-up, we could increase the signing bonus to $75,000. Harold nearly dropped the phone. $75,000 would not only save the farm, but transform it entirely. He could replace equipment, expand the bee yard, hire seasonal help. Possibilities bloomed in his mind like wildflowers after a spring rain. "Mr. Blackwell, are you still there?" "Yes, sorry," Harold said, collecting himself. That sounds like something we could discuss. But I'd want my son to look over any contract before I sign. He works in business in Nashville." "Of course. I'll have our legal team draft a revised proposal and email it to you. Can we meet early next week to finalize details?" Harold agreed, provided his lawyer a courtesy title for James, who had a business degree but no legal training, approved the terms. After hanging up, he sat at his kitchen table in stunned silence. The reality of his changed circumstances slowly sinking in. The farm would survive. Not just survive, but potentially thrive in a way it hadn't since his grandfather's day, when the Blackwell name had been synonymous with quality throughout the county. All because a woman with a refined palate and an influential platform had happened to drive past his roadside sign. The thought of Elise Chevalier reminded Harold that he still hadn't read her entire review. He didn't own a computer, never saw the need for one when his flip phone handled calls and texts just fine, but Mrs. Peterson at the general store had internet access and a printer. Perhaps she'd help him look up the article. After placing a closed sign at the end of his driveway to discourage more visitors, Harold drove into town. The general store was unusually busy for a Monday morning. With several unfamiliar cars parked outside, more tourists drawn by the honey story, Harold guessed. His suspicion was confirmed when he entered the store, and conversation abruptly died down, all eyes turning toward him. Mrs. Peterson bustled over, her round face beaming. "Harold Blackwell, the man of the hour. We were just talking about you. Harold shifted uncomfortably under the collective gaze. "Good morning, Marge. I was hoping to use your computer for a bit, if that's all right." Of course, of course. Come right back to the office." She led him through the store, whispering excitedly, "You've put our little town on the map, Harold. The Bee is booked solid for the next 2 weekends, with food tourists wanting to try your honey." In the small back office, Mrs. Peterson logged into her computer and pulled up the Gastronomie Mondiale website, navigating to Elise Chevalier's latest column. "Here you go, dear. Take all the time you need. And could you sign a jar of honey for me later? I've been saving one from the last batch you brought in." Left alone, Harold settled in to read the full review. It was even more effusive than the excerpt he'd seen, describing his honey as a transcendent expression of terroir and proof that artisanal American food production can rival the finest European traditions. The article went on to contrast his small batch methods with industrial honey production, positioning Blackwell Farm as a bastion of authenticity in an increasingly homogenized food landscape. The final paragraph gave Harold pause. "In our conversation, Mr. Blackwell expressed uncertainty about the future of his family farm, a common predicament for small agricultural producers facing the economic pressures of corporatine, consolidation, and climate challenges. It would be a profound loss if operations like his were to disappear, taking with them generations of knowledge and tradition. As consumers, we vote with our purchases. In choosing products like Blackwell Farm honey, we not only reward ourselves with superior quality, but help preserve a vital piece of America's culinary heritage." Harold leaned back in the chair, momentarily overwhelmed. He didn't recall expressing uncertainty about the farm's future to Elise, though he supposed his discomfort when she'd asked about the 5th generation had been telling enough. She'd read between the lines and turned his predicament into a call to action for her readers. He printed the article and thanked Mrs. Peterson, who insisted on introducing him to several customers eagerly waiting to meet the honeyman. Harold endured the attention with as much grace as he could muster, answering questions about his bees and promising that more honey would be available soon. By the time he returned home, it was mid-afternoon, and another surprise awaited him. A sleek silver Audi was parked in his driveway, and a familiar figure sat on his porch steps, his son James. "I thought you weren't coming until Friday," Harold said as he emerged from his truck. James stood, looking somewhat sheepish in his crisp button-down shirt and designer jeans, so different from the farm clothes he'd worn growing up. At 32, he was a younger, less weathered version of Harold, with the same square jaw and thoughtful eyes. "I moved some meetings around," James explained, embracing his father briefly. "Figured you could use some help sooner rather than later, given what's happening." Harold was touched by the gesture. Relations between them had been cordial but distant since James had chosen a city career over the Sia farm. This sudden willingness to drop everything and come home suggested that perhaps the rift wasn't as wide as Harold had feared. "I appreciate that, son." He gestured toward the house. "Come on in. I could use a fresh perspective on all this." Inside, Harold brewed coffee while James studied the various offers and business cards spread across the kitchen table. "Dad, do you realize what's happening here?" James asked, his expression a mix of awe and amusement. "Your honey is trending. The article's been shared thousands of times on social media. Angela says it's all anyone in the foodie community is talking about." Harold shrugged, uncomfortable with the concept of trending. "It's just honey, James. Same as I've been producing for years." "But that's exactly the point," James insisted, warming to the topic. "In a world of mass production and artificial flavors, authenticity is the ultimate luxury. Your honey represents something real, something with history and tradition behind it." Harold recognized his son's marketing mind at work, analyzing the situation in terms of consumer psychology and brand positioning. It was a perspective Harold had always found somewhat alien, but now he listened intently, recognizing that James's expertise could be valuable in navigating these unfamiliar waters. "This Margot woman's offer is the most straightforward," James said after reviewing the various proposals. "But I'd want to see the detailed contract before recommending anything. The exclusivity clause could be restrictive if not carefully worded. Harold nodded, explaining his conversation with Margot earlier that day. She seemed open to negotiation on the terms. Said she'd send a revised proposal soon. Good, we can work with that. James leaned back, studying his father thoughtfully. The real question is, what do you want out of all this, Dad? What's your vision for the farm now that survival isn't the immediate concern? The question caught Harold off guard. He'd been so focused on keeping the farm afloat that he hadn't allowed himself to think beyond immediate survival. What did he want? The answer came more easily than he expected. I want to honor what we've built here, he said slowly. 4 generations of Blackwells have worked this land. I want to make sure there's something worthwhile to pass on, not just to you, if you ever decided to come back, but to the community. This farm has always been more than just a business to me. James nodded, his expression softening. I know, Dad, and I'm sorry if I ever made you feel like I didn't value that. I just had to find my own path. You don't have to apologize for that, Harold said. Your mother and I always wanted you to make your own choices. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only when James's phone chimed with an incoming email. It's from Margot, he said, scanning the message. She sent the revised proposal. And, wow, Dad, I think you should see this. He handed the phone to Harold, who squinted at the small screen. The new offer maintained the $75,000 signing bonus, but added a marketing budget for farm heritage storytelling and a clause allowing Harold to develop educational programs about beekeeping, with Culinary Connections providing promotional support. They're not just buying your honey, James explained. They're investing in your story, the farm, the family history, the traditional methods. It's all part of the package they're selling to high-end consumers. Harold frowned slightly. So, I'm not just a beekeeper, I'm a what? A brand? In a sense, yes. James must have seen the discomfort in his father's expression, because he quickly added, but on your terms, Dad. This clause here, look, they're explicitly committing to maintaining your production methods and quality standards. They know that's what makes your honey special. Harold considered this. The idea of becoming a brand still felt strange, but if it meant preserving the farm and its traditions, perhaps it was a compromise worth making. What would your mother say? James asked softly, touching on the question that had been in Harold's mind since this all began. Harold smiled, remembering Marjorie's practical nature and her fierce dedication to the farm. She'd probably say we should take the money and fix the barn roof before it collapses. James laughed. Yeah, that sounds like Mom. But, Harold continued, she'd also say not to let dollar signs blind us to what really matters. The farm isn't just about making a living, it's about living right. For the next several days, Harold and James worked together to evaluate the various opportunities presented by Elise's review. James contacted several food industry consultants, using his business connections to get second opinions on the offers. Harold focused on assessing his current honey production capacity and developing a realistic expansion plan. The media attention continued unabated. Harold reluctantly agreed to a few carefully selected interviews, including one with Southern Living magazine that would feature the farm in its November issue. He declined all television appearances, despite increasingly generous offers from morning shows and food networks. I'm a beekeeper, not a performer, he told James, after turning down a particularly persistent producer. If they want to tell people about the honey, that's fine. But I don't need to be on camera to do it. James respected his father's boundaries, handling most of the media requests himself, and serving as a buffer between Harold and the more intrusive aspects of sudden fame. Together, they drafted a response to Margot's revised proposal, accepting the main terms but requesting modifications to the educational program clause to ensure Harold maintained control over content. By Thursday, a tentative agreement was in place. Harold would maintain a small direct-to-consumer business locally, while granting Culinary Connections exclusive distribution rights for all other markets. The signing bonus would be paid immediately upon contract execution, with the first honey delivery expected the following spring. That evening, Harold and James sat on the porch, watching the sunset with cold beers and Honda ritual they had shared many times before James moved to Nashville. The tension that had characterized their relationship in recent years had eased, replaced by a new sense of partnership. They had different strengths, different perspectives, but they were working toward a common goal: the preservation and renewal of Blackwell Farm. "I've been thinking," James said, after a comfortable silence. "What if I came back more regularly? Not to live full-time, at least not yet, but to help with the business side of things. Angela can work remotely 2 weeks a month, and Nashville's only a couple of hours away." Harold tried to hide his surprise and pleasure at the suggestion. "You'd want to do that? What about your job?" "I'd keep working in Nashville part-time. My company's been pushing for more flexibility anyway." James took a sip of his beer. "To be honest, Dad, this week has reminded me how much I miss this place. Not just the farm, but the sense of, I don't know, doing something tangible, something real." Harold nodded, understanding exactly what his son meant. There was a satisfaction in physical work, in nurturing living things and harvesting the fruits of your labor, that couldn't be replicated in an office environment. "We'd be happy to have you," he said simply. "Both of you." As darkness fell, they continued talking about expansion plans, about creating a small visitor center where people could learn about beekeeping, about the possibility of hiring local students as apprentices to keep traditional methods alive. The farm Harold had been prepared to lose was now the foundation for a future neither of them had imagined a week earlier. "You know," James said as they finally headed inside, "we should try to contact Elise Chevalier. Send her a thank you or something. None of this would be happening without her review." Harold had been thinking the same thing. "Do you think you could find her contact information? I'd like to invite her back to the farm when the fall honey is ready. Show her what her words have made possible." Friday morning brought a flurry of activity as James prepared to return to Nashville for the weekend. He planned to discuss the contract details with a lawyer friend and talk to Angela about their potential part-time relocation to the farm. Harold, meanwhile, was eager to check on his bees, having neglected them somewhat during the week's chaos. "I'll be back Sunday evening," James said as he loaded his overnight bag into the Audi. "If Margot sends the final contract, don't sign anything until I've had a chance to review it." Harold assured him he wouldn't make any major decisions without consultation. After James departed, he suited up in his protective gear and headed out to the beehives, eager to lose himself in the familiar routine of inspection and care. The bees were thriving, seemingly unaffected by their keeper's sudden change in fortunes. Harold worked methodically through the hives, checking for signs of disease or pest infestation, monitoring honey production, and assessing overall colony health. The rhythmic buzzing of thousands of workers going about their business had always calmed him, and today was no exception. As he closed up the final hive, Harold noticed a red rental car approaching on the farm road. His heart quickened as he recognized it as similar to Elise Chevalier's vehicle from the previous week. Could she have returned? He hurried back to the house, removing his bee suit as he went. By the time he reached the porch, the car had parked, and a woman was emerging. But it wasn't Elise. This visitor was younger, perhaps in her late 20s, with short blonde hair and a camera hanging around her neck. "Mr. Blackwell?" she called, waving as she approached. "I'm Sophie Mercer, photojournalist for Food Travel magazine. I'm doing a follow-up piece on Elise Chevalier's Authentic America series. I was hoping to get some photos of you and your bee operation." Harold's momentary disappointment gave way to resignation. Of course it wasn't. Elise Y with the famous Critic returned to his obscure farm. She'd moved on to discover the next hidden culinary gem, leaving Harold to navigate the consequences of her attention. "Did you have an appointment, Ms. Mercer?" he asked, more sharply than he'd intended. The young woman faltered. "Well, no, but my editor thought, given the buzz around your honey—" She stopped, realizing the unintentional pun. "Sorry, I should have called ahead." Harold softened at her genuine contrition. "It's all right. I've just been a bit overwhelmed by all the attention lately." "I can imagine," Sophie said sympathetically. "If it's a bad time, I can come back another day." Harold considered sending her away but found himself reluctant to disappoint the earnest young photographer. "No, it's fine. I was just checking on the bees anyway. You're welcome to take some photos, Though I'm afraid I don't have any honey to show you. Sold out completely earlier this week. Sophie brightened. That's actually perfect for our angle. The small producer whose authentic product is so in demand that it can't keep up. Do you mind if I photograph you in your bee suit by the hives? For the next hour, Harold went through the motions of beekeeping, while Sophie documented his every move. She asked intelligent questions about his methods, showing a genuine interest in the process, rather than just seeking dramatic images. By the time they finished, Harold had warmed to her considerably. Would you like some iced tea? He offered as they walked back to the house. It's not honey, but it's the best I can do at the moment. Over tea on the porch, Sophie shared stories of other artisanal producers she'd photographed for the magazine, a cheesemaker in Vermont, a third-generation sorghum producer in Kentucky, a family of oyster farmers in Maine. All were facing challenges similar to Harold's, maintaining traditional methods in a changing economic landscape, balancing quality against demand, preserving heritage, while embracing necessary innovation. You're part of something bigger than you might realize, Sophie told him. There's a movement building around authentic food, production consumers pushing back against industrialization, seeking connection to the sources of what they eat. Harold was reminded of James's comments about authenticity as a luxury. Seems like a lot of fuss over something as simple as honey, he said. Sophie smiled. It's not just about the honey, though. It's about what it represents, a direct link to the land, to history, to methods that have been refined over generations. In a world where most people have no idea where their food comes from, that connection has real value. As she prepared to leave, Sophie hesitated, then asked, Have you spoken with Elise since the review was published? No, Harold admitted. I've been hoping to thank her, but I don't have her contact information. Sophie reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. Here. This is Elise's direct email. She doesn't give it out often, but I think she'd want to hear from you. Harold accepted the card gratefully. Thank you. I've been wondering why she chose my farm in the first place. There must be thousands of small honey producers across the country. You'd have to ask her, Sophie said. But I will tell you this, Elise has an almost uncanny ability to find authenticity. She can taste the difference between food produced with genuine care and food produced merely for profit. She smiled. Your honey told her everything she needed to know about you, Mr. Blackwell. After Sophie left, Harold sat at his kitchen table with Elise's business card propped against the salt shaker. What would he say to the woman who had transformed his circumstances with a single article? Thank you. Seemed inadequate for the gift she'd given him. Not just financial salvation, but a renewed sense of purpose and the unexpected reconciliation with his son. Harold had never been good with words. On the farm, actions spoke louder than any eloquent speech. You showed care through physical labor, through daily attention to the needs of plants and animals, through the meticulous maintenance of equipment and structures. How could he convey that same sincerity in an email to a worldly food critic? In the end, he decided simplicity was best. He drove into town to use Mrs. Peterson's computer again, composing a brief message. Dear Miss Chevalier, I wanted to thank you for your kind words about my honey. Your review has changed everything for my farm, and I am deeply grateful. If you find yourself in Tennessee again, there will always be a jar of our best honey waiting for you. Sincerely, Harold Blackwell Farm. He hit send before he could second-guess himself, then headed home to call James with an update on the day's developments. The weekend passed quietly, with only a few visitors braving the dusty farm road to see if any honey had become available. Harold enjoyed the brass, relative solitude, using the time to plan the expansion of his bee yard. He would need to increase from 25 hives to at least 60 to meet the production targets in Margot's contract. And each new hive would require careful establishment and monitoring. Sunday evening brought James back from Nashville, this time with Angela in tow. Harold had met his future daughter-in-law several times before, but had never felt he knew her well. She was a polished city woman with a rapid-fire way of speaking and a keen intelligence that sometimes intimidated him. Tonight, though, Angela seemed different, more relaxed, and genuinely interested in the farm. She asked thoughtful questions about the honey, production process, and offered insights into how the Blackwell Farm story could be effectively communicated to upscale urban consumers. "The heritage angle is compelling," she said as they finished dinner, "but it's your commitment to traditional methods that really sets you apart. Most small producers scale up by cutting corners. The fact that you're refusing to do that, that's your strongest selling point." Harold was surprised by her perceptiveness. "You sound like you've given this some thought." Angela smiled. "James and I have been talking about little else all weekend." She glanced at his son, who nodded encouragingly. "Actually, Harold, I have a proposition for you. I've been looking for a more meaningful direction in my marketing career. What would you think about me helping to develop the Blackwell Farm brand? I could work remotely from here part of the month, same as James." Harold blinked in surprise. "You'd want to do that? Leave Nashville part-time for a farm in the middle of nowhere?" "It wouldn't be forever," Angela admitted. "But for a year or two, while we establish the brand? Absolutely. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to build something authentic from the ground up. In my industry, that's gold," James added. "We'd need to fix up the old foreman's cottage if we're going to stay here part-time. I figured we could use some of the signing bonus for that, if you're open to it." Harold looked from James to Angela, overwhelmed by their enthusiasm. The foreman's cottage had stood empty since his father's time. When the farm had been large enough to require hired help, it needed substantial renovation, but it was structurally sound and would give the young couple their own space on the property. "I think that's a fine idea," he said finally. "Both parts, the cottage and Angela's involvement. I could use all the help I can get with this brand business." James grinned, clearly relieved. "Great. I've already sketched out some renovation plans. Nothing fancy, but comfortable enough for extended stays." As they cleared the dinner dishes, Harold's phone pinged with an incoming email, an unusual occurrence, as few people had his address. It was from Elise Chevalier. "Dear Mr. Blackwell, thank you for your kind message. It is I who should be thanking you for maintaining such exceptional standards in your honey production. Discovering products like yours is the greatest joy of my profession. You may wonder how I came to your farm. It was not by chance. The fellow food writer who grew up in Tennessee mentioned your honey as one of his fondest childhood memories. When my American tour brought me to your region, I made a point of seeking you out. I am delighted to hear that my review has had a positive impact on your business. Too often, small producers with exceptional products remain undiscovered, their traditions lost as economic pressures force them to close or compromise on quality. It gives me great satisfaction to know that Blackwell Farm will continue for another generation. We'll indeed return to Tennessee next fall as part of a follow-up series on American artisanal producers. I would be honored to visit your farm again and see how things have evolved. Until then, keep faith with your bees. They have served you well. Warm regards." Elise Chevalier. Harold read the email twice, touched by its warmth and personal tone. He'd expected a brief acknowledgement, not this thoughtful response from a woman who must receive hundreds of messages daily. The fact that she planned to return to the farm next year gave him a goal to work toward a timeline for implementing the changes that would ensure Blackwell Farm not only survived but thrived. He showed the message to James and Angela, who were equally impressed by Elise's commitment to following the story she had started. "This is perfect," Angela said. "A follow-up visit from Elise next fall gives us a clear deadline for the first phase of rebranding and expansion. We should document the transformation process, maybe even start a simple website to share updates with customers." James nodded enthusiastically. "And we could use her visit to launch the educational component, maybe host a small event for local schools or food enthusiasts." Harold listened to their ideas with growing amusement. 24 hours ago, the concept of rebranding his small farm operation would have seemed absurd. Now he was sitting at his kitchen table with his son and future daughter-in-law, planning a business strategy that encompassed everything from renovation projects to educational programs to online marketing. "One step at a time," he reminded them, echoing Marjorie's favorite saying. "Let's start by finalizing the contract with Margot and setting up the new hives. The rest will follow." James and Angela agreed, though Harold could see they were already mentally several steps ahead, envisioning possibilities he hadn't considered. Their energy was infectious, and for the first time in years, Harold found himself looking forward to the future rather than dreading it. As summer gave way to fall, the transformation of Blackwell Farm began in earnest. The signing bonus from Culinary Connections provided the capital needed for immediate improvements. Repairing the barn roof, renovating the foreman's cottage for James and Angela's part-time occupancy, and upgrading the honey extraction equipment to increase efficiency without compromising quality. Harold established 30 new hives, carefully positioning them to maximize access to diverse wildflower sources while maintaining adequate distance from pesticide-treated crops on neighboring properties. Each new colony required constant monitoring during its establishment phase, and Harold found himself working longer hours than he had in years, though with a renewed sense of purpose that made the labor feel less burdensome. James commuted from Nashville 3 days a week, focusing on the business aspects of the operation. He negotiated with local contractors for the renovation work, researched sustainable expansion practices, and managed the flood of media and customer inquiries that continued to arrive daily. Angela's contributions proved equally valuable. She developed a branding strategy that emphasized the farm's heritage and Harold's commitment to traditional methods. She designed a new label for the honey jars, featuring a simple line drawing of the farmhouse against a backdrop of stylized honeycomb, with Blackwell Farm Est 1891 prominently displayed. The modern, clean aesthetic somehow managed to convey both tradition and quality, appealing to the upscale urban consumers who were now clamoring for Harold's honey. By October, the farm had been transformed in subtle but significant ways. The building sported fresh paint in the original white with green trim that Harold's grandfather had chosen decades earlier. The gravel driveway had been regraded and extended to create a small parking area near the workshop, which was being converted into a visitor center and retail space for the direct sales Harold had insisted on maintaining. Most importantly, the bees were thriving. The fall honey harvest exceeded Harold's expectations, producing enough to fulfill a small initial order for Culinary Connections while maintaining a reserve for local sales. The flavor profile was exactly as Harold had predicted months earlier, when Elise first visited, deeper and more complex than the summer harvest, with hints of goldenrod and aster giving it a distinctive character. As the first frost approached, Harold received an unexpected call from Margot. "Harold, we've had an inquiry I thought you should know about," she said without preamble. "The White House chef is interested in featuring Blackwell Farm honey in a state dinner next spring. They're doing a Taste of America theme, showcasing artisanal producers from across the country." Harold nearly dropped the phone. "The White House? As in the president?" "Yes," Margot confirmed, a smile evident in her voice. "They read Elise's review and requested a sample. I sent them some of the summer batch she provided. They were impressed." "Well, I'll be," Harold murmured, at a loss for more eloquent words. "That's quite an honor." "It certainly is. They'll need 30 jars for the event, and they're hoping you might be willing to provide a short written piece about the farm's history for the dinner program." Harold agreed, still somewhat dazed by the request. After hanging up, he stood on his porch, watching the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rejuvenated farm. 6 months earlier, he had been on the verge of losing everything. Now, his honey would be served at the White House, his farm was secure, and his son was reconnecting with his heritage in a way Harold had never thought possible. "You wouldn't believe it, Marjorie," he said softly to the autumn breeze, a habit he'd developed in the years since her passing. "Our honey at the White House. And James coming back to the farm, at least part-time. It's like everything we hoped for is finally happening, just when I'd given up hope." The wind rustled the fallen leaves, and Harold allowed himself to imagine it was her response, practical as always, reminding him that good fortune, like bad, was often temporary. What mattered was how you met each day, regardless of circumstances. I know," he murmured, one step at a time. Winter settled over the farm, bringing a natural pause in the frantic activity of the past months. The bees clustered in their hives, surviving on the honey stores Harold had carefully left for them. The cold months were traditionally a time for maintenance and planning on the farm, and this year was no exception, though the scale of planning had expanded dramatically. James and Angela spent the holidays at the farm, now comfortably settled in the renovated cottage. Around the kitchen table, the three of them mapped out the next year's strategy: which wildflower seeds to plant in the fallow fields to support the expanded bee colonies, how to structure the educational programs Angela had proposed, when to launch the farm's new website. "We've had inquiries from several schools about field trips," Angela reported, reviewing her notes. "And 2 culinary programs want to bring students for workshops on artisanal food production." Harold, who had once valued his privacy and solitude, found himself surprisingly open to the idea of visitors. There was something satisfying about sharing his knowledge with others, particularly young people who might carry traditional methods forward into the future. "We'll need to work out a schedule," he said. "The bees come first, especially during critical periods, but I suppose we could manage small groups once or twice a month." James nodded. "We should coordinate the visits with honey extraction days when possible. That's the most interesting part of the process for visitors to observe." As they continued discussing logistics, Harold marveled at how naturally James had slipped back into the rhythms of farm life. His son's business acumen was still evident in his approach to problems, but it was now tempered with a deeper appreciation for the farm's fundamental purpose. Not just producing honey, but preserving a way of life that had sustained the Blackwell family for generations. Christmas brought a surprise visit from Sheriff Dave Riley, who arrived bearing a gift-wrapped jar of very familiar honey. "Bought this in Nashville last weekend," Dave explained as Harold unwrapped it. "Specialty food shop downtown. $35. For honey I used to buy from you for $10 at the farmer's market." Harold examined the jar with interest. It was his summer batch, now elegantly packaged with the new Blackwell Farm label and a small brochure detailing the farm's history and traditional production methods. Angela's touch. $35, he repeated, shaking his head in disbelief. "That's quite a markup." "And they're selling every jar they can get," Dave said. Place was packed with holiday shoppers looking for authentic gifts. He clapped Harold on the shoulder. "You've done good, Harold. Whole county's proud of you." The sheriff's words stayed with Harold long after the holidays ended. The whole county's proud. It was a reminder that the farm's revival wasn't just a personal victory, but something that benefited the broader community. Local pride in Blackwell Farm translated to increased tourism, more customers for businesses in town, a renewed sense of possibility in a rural area that had seen too many small operations fail in recent years. As winter gave way to the first tentative warmth of spring, Harold's thoughts turned to Elise Chevalier's promised return in the fall. He wanted to show her not just a farm that had been saved from foreclosure, but one that was actively evolving while remaining true to its core values, a delicate balance he was still learning to maintain. The bees emerged from their winter cluster as the early blooms appeared, and Harold spent long days in the bee yard, monitoring the health of each colony and preparing for the season's first honey flow. The 30 new hives had survived the winter well, their populations beginning to expand with the availability of pollen and nectar. March brought the first group of visitors, say a class of 3rd graders from the local elementary school, shepherded by Mrs. Abernathy. Harold had prepared a simple presentation about bees and honey production, complete with an observation hive and honey samples. The children's enthusiasm was contagious, their questions ranging from pragmatic, "Do you get stung a lot?" to philosophical, "Do bees have feelings?" "You have a natural gift for teaching, Mr. Blackwell," Mrs. Abernathy told him as the class prepared to leave. "These children will remember this day for years to come." Harold brushed off the compliment, but privately, he was pleased. Sharing his knowledge with the next generation felt like an extension of the farm's purpose, not just producing honey, but cultivating an appreciation for the natural processes that made it possible. April arrived with an unexpected development. A representative from a well-known cooking show contacted James about featuring Blackwell Farm in an episode about American artisanal food producers. Harold's immediate instinct was to decline. He still felt uncomfortable with the idea of being on television, but James and Angela urged him to reconsider. "This isn't just about publicity, Dad," James argued as they discussed the offer over dinner. It's about educating people about what makes traditional honey production special. Think of it as an extension of what you did with those third graders last month. Harold remained unconvinced. Those were local children, learning about their community. This is a national audience, looking for entertainment. It can be both, Angela countered gently. Educational and entertaining. And it aligns perfectly with what we're trying to achieve with the brand positioning Blackwell Farm as a standard bearer for authentic food production. In the end, Harold agreed to a compromise. The show could film at the farm, but the focus would be on the bees and the honey-making process, not on him personally. James would handle most of the on-camera talking points, with Harold demonstrating the actual beekeeping techniques. The filming took place over 2 days in late April, as the spring honey flow was beginning. The production crew was smaller than Harold had feared. A director, a camera operator, a sound technician, and the show's host. A well-known chef whose respectful approach to ingredients had earned Harold's grudging approval when James had shown him clips online. To Harold's surprise, the experience was almost enjoyable. The host asked intelligent questions about the relationship between flowering plants and honey flavor profiles, about the challenges of maintaining traditional methods while scaling production, about the farm's history, and Harold's personal journey as a beekeeper. The focus remained on the craft rather than the craftsman, just as Harold had requested. "You have something special here," the host told Harold during a filming break. "I've visited food producers all over the country, and there's a harmony to your operation that's rare. The bees, the land, the methods, that all works together." Harold nodded, recognizing the truth in the observation. "That's what my wife used to say. She called it right relationship, everything in its proper place, serving its proper function." The comment made it into the final cut of the episode, which aired in June to an audience of millions. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Orders flooded into Culinary Connections from specialty shops across the country. The website Angela had created for the farm saw a 500% increase in traffic. Local tourism spiked as food enthusiasts made pilgrimages to the source of what the show's host had called America's most honest honey. By midsummer, it was clear that even with the expanded operation, Blackwell Farm couldn't meet the growing demand. Harold found himself facing a decision he had never anticipated: how to maintain quality and authenticity while continuing to grow. "We have options," James explained during one of their now regular strategy sessions. "We could expand further, add another 50 hives, maybe hire an assistant beekeeper, or we could maintain our current production level and simply accept that our honey will be a limited availability product." Harold considered this. The idea of Blackwell Farm honey becoming an exclusive luxury item didn't sit right with him. His father and grandfather had produced honey for their community neighbors, and local stores had always been their primary customers. But neither did he want to expand so rapidly that the personal attention he gave to each hive would be compromised. "What if we take a third approach?" he suggested. "Instead of just growing Blackwell Farm, what if we help other small beekeepers in the area adopt our methods? Create a collective of sorts, with shared standards and practices." James and Angela exchanged surprised glances. "A cooperative?" James asked. "You'd be willing to share your methods?" "The methods aren't secret," Harold said. "They're just traditional approaches that have fallen out of favor because they're more labor-intensive. If demand for authentic honey is as strong as it seems to be, maybe that creates an opportunity for other small farms in Das. The area to diversify." The idea took root quickly. By August, Harold had identified 3 neighboring farms interested in establishing beekeeping operations under the guidance of Blackwell Farm. Each would maintain independent ownership, but would adhere to a set of shared production standards in exchange for distribution support through Culinary Connections and the use of a Blackwell Collective seal of approval on their products. "It's brilliant," Margot said when James presented the concept to her. "Authenticity at scale, without losing the artisanal quality. Our clients will love the regional variations in flavor profiles from different farm locations." The farmers Johnson, Wade, and crew spent a week at Blackwell Farm, learning Harold's methods and reseeding their starter colonies, which Harold had carefully split from his strongest hives. The arrangement benefited everyone. Harold could maintain the integrity of his operation, while meeting market demand. The neighboring farms gained a valuable new revenue stream, and consumers had access to authentic, small-batch honey-produced press. According to traditional methods. As fall approached, bringing with it Elise Chevalier's anticipated return, Harold found himself reflecting on the extraordinary changes of the past year. The farm that had been on the brink of foreclosure was now the center of a growing movement toward traditional food production in the county. The bank that had once sent threatening letters now featured Blackwell Farm in its Small Business Success Stories brochure. The son who had chosen a city career over farming was now deeply invested in the farm's future, bringing his unique skills to bear on the challenges of sustainable growth. Most surprisingly of all, Harold himself had changed. The solitary farmer who had valued privacy and routine now found himself energized by selective social engagement, teaching visiting students about beekeeping, mentoring the collective farmers, even occasionally speaking at regional agricultural conferences. He would never be comfortable with fame or excessive attention, but he had discovered a genuine satisfaction in sharing his knowledge and seeing others benefit from it. In late September, as Harold was preparing for the fall honey harvest, he received an email from Elise Chevalier confirming her visit for the following week. She would be arriving on Tuesday afternoon and hoped to spend a full day at the farm on Wednesday to see the changes since her last visit. Harold found himself looking forward to her return with an enthusiasm that surprised him. He wanted her to see what her review had made possible, not just the obvious physical improvements to the farm, but the less tangible transformations. The renewed sense of purpose, the strengthened family bonds, the growing community of traditional producers inspired by Blackwell Farm's success. Tuesday dawned clear and crisp, with the first hint of autumn color touching the trees at the edge of the property. Harold spent the morning inspecting the hives one final time before Elise's arrival, ensuring everything was in order for the harvest demonstration he had planned for her visit. The bees were thriving, the honey stores abundant, each hive a humming testament to the success of his expanded operation. As he worked, Harold reflected on the curious chain of events that had brought him to this moment. A random stop by a stranger, a chance tasting of his honey, a review read by the right people at the right time. So many coincidences that had collectively altered the trajectory of his life and the fate of the farm. Or perhaps not coincidences at all. Perhaps, as Marjorie would have said, it was simply the universe's way of bringing like minds together, those who valued authenticity finding each other across boundaries of geography and circumstance. At precisely 3 o'clock, a now familiar red rental car appeared on the farm road. Harold straightened his shirt and walked out to meet his visitor, the woman whose discerning palate and influential words had transformed a jar of honey into a lifeline for a struggling farmer and his family legacy. Elise Chevalier emerged from the car, her dark hair now streaked with elegant gray, her eyes taking in the changes to the farm with evident approval. She extended her hand to Harold, but he surprised himself by opening his arms for a hug instead. "Welcome back to Blackwell Farm, Miss Chevalier," he said as they embraced briefly. "There's someone who's been waiting a year to thank you properly." Elise smiled, her expression warm with genuine pleasure at the greeting. "The thanks are mine, Mr. Blackwell. Few things in my profession bring me as much satisfaction as seeing exceptional producers thrive. And please, call me Elise." "Then you must call me Harold," he replied, gesturing toward the farmhouse. "Come inside. I have something special to show you." In the kitchen, Harold opened a cabinet to reveal a single jar of honey, set apart from the others. The label was handwritten rather than printed, reading simply, "Reserved for Elise Chevalier with gratitude." "This is from the first harvest after your review was published," Harold explained, handing her the jar. "I set it aside that day, knowing that whatever happened next, I owed you a debt that couldn't be properly expressed in words." Elise accepted the jar with evident emotion, turning it in her hands to watch the light play through the amber liquid. "This is a precious gift, Harold. Thank you." They spent the remainder of the afternoon touring the expanded operation. The new hives, the renovated workshop turned visitor center, the wildflower meadow that had replaced part of the former cornfield to support the Buren. Growing bee population. Harold introduced Elise to James and Angela, who had come down from Nashville for the occasion, and shared the story of the Blackwell Collective and its early success. "You've built something remarkable here," Elise said, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, the famous food critic now comfortable in a rocking chair with a glass of sweet tea. "Not just a successful business, but a model for sustainable growth that honors tradition." Harold shook his head modestly. "We've just tried to do right by the bees and the land. The rest has followed from that." "But that's precisely what makes it exceptional," Elise insisted. "In a world obsessed with shortcuts and maximizing profits, you've demonstrated that staying true to traditional methods can be both ethically and economically viable." They continued talking as twilight deepened, sharing stories of their respective journeys. Harold's decades maintaining the family farm through changing agricultural landscapes. Elise's travels around the world in search of authentic food experiences. Despite their different backgrounds, they discovered a shared philosophy. That food produced with integrity carried within it something essential to human well-being, something beyond nutritional value or mere flavor, something that connected producer and consumer in a web of meaning that transcended commercial transaction. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Elise asked a question that caught Harold off guard. "Do you ever regret the attention my review brought to your farm? The loss of privacy, the pressure to expand, the expectations?" Harold considered this carefully, rocking gently in his chair as he formulated his response. "There have been moments," he admitted, "when the phone wouldn't stop ringing, or when visitors would show up unannounced, or when James and Angela started talking about brand positioning in market segments." He paused, watching a bat swoop across the dusky farmyard in pursuit of insects. "But no, I don't regret it. Before your review, I was losing more than just the farm. I was losing hope, the connection to my son, the belief that what I was doing mattered, the sense that there was a future here worth fighting for. Your attention brought challenges, yes, but it also brought possibilities. It reminded me that value isn't always measured in dollars and cents." And Elise nodded, seeming satisfied with his answer. "I wondered if you might resent the intrusion. Some producers do, especially those who didn't seek the spotlight." "The way I see it," Harold said, "sharing the farm's story and the honey with a wider audience isn't an intrusion. It's an extension of purpose. My grandfather used to say that good work deserves witnesses. For years, I thought that meant family or neighbors. Now I understand it can mean something broader." The following day, Harold demonstrated the fall honey harvest process for Elise, explaining how the different wildflowers blooming in late summer and early autumn created a flavor profile distinct from the spring pave and summer harvests. She took detailed notes and photographs, occasionally asking questions that revealed her deep knowledge of artisanal food production. "For my follow-up article," she explained, "I want to focus on the concept of seasonal variation in honey. How the same location can produce distinctly different flavor profiles throughout the year, reflecting the changing landscape. It's a way of understanding terroir that many consumers haven't considered." End quote. Harold appreciated her approach. Rather than simply writing about the farm's commercial success following her initial review, she was delving deeper into the agricultural and environmental factors that made the honey special in the first place. They worked together throughout the day, Harold opening hives and extracting frames, while Elise observed and documented. She insisted on trying each step of the process herself, donning a bee suit and carefully handling the frames under Harold's guidance. By late afternoon, they had harvested and processed enough honey to fill a dozen jars, which Elise would take with her for the tasting component of her article. As evening approached and Elise prepared to leave for her next appointment, she paused by her car, seeming reluctant to end the visit. "I've been to hundreds of food producers around the world," she said, "but few have affected me as deeply as your farm, Harold. There's a harmony here that's increasingly rare in our fractured food system." Harold nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "We try to work with nature rather than against it. The bees teach us that every day." "Precisely." Elise smiled. "My readers will receive the article as a story about honey, but my hope is that they'll absorb a deeper message about relationship between farmer and land, producer and consumer, tradition and innovation. She extended her hand, which Harold shook warmly. "Until next time," she said. "And there will be a next time. Blackwell Farm is now a fixed point on my American culinary map." As the red car disappeared down the farm road, Harold felt a curious mix of emotion: satisfaction at a successful visit, pride in what the farm had become, and a quiet determination to ensure that Elise's faith in Blackwell Farm remained justified in the years ahead. He walked slowly back toward the house, where James and Angela were waiting to hear about the day's events. The evening air was sweet with the scent of autumn flowers, and the gentle humming of bees returning to their hives created a soothing backdrop to his thoughts. 1 year ago, he had been a struggling farmer, contemplating the end of a family legacy. Today, he was the steward of a thriving enterprise that honored that legacy while creating new possibilities for the future. The farm that had sustained 4 generations of Blackwells would now continue to a 5th, though perhaps in ways his ancestors could never have imagined. As he reached the porch steps, Harold paused to look back at the bee yard, the neat white hives luminous in the fading light. The bees would keep working until darkness fell completely, maximizing every moment of daylight to gather nectar and strengthen the colony. Their single-minded dedication had seen them through countless challenges over millions of years of evolution. Perhaps there was wisdom in their approach. Focus on the work that matters, adapt when necessary, and trust that small, consistent efforts could, over time, create something of remarkable value. "One step at a time," Harold murmured to himself, smiling as he climbed the stairs to join his family. 6 months later, on a warm spring morning, Harold stood at the edge of his newly expanded wildflower meadow, watching as thousands of bees moved methodically from bloom to bloom. The farm hummed with activity, both insect and human. In the distance, a school bus was pulling into the new visitor parking area, bringing another group of students for the educational program that had become a regular feature of Blackwell Farm operations. Near the renovated barn, James was conducting a training session for 2 new members of the Blackwell Collective Farmers from the next county who had heard about the initiative and wanted to diversify their own bee operations. Angela was in the visitor center, preparing for a weekend honey tasting event that had sold out weeks in advance. The changes continued to unfold at a pace that sometimes left Harold breathless. Elise's follow-up article, "The Seasons of Sweetness," had appeared in Gastronomie Mondiale 3 months earlier, further cementing Blackwell Farm's reputation as a producer of exceptional honey. The collective was now 7 farms strong, with more applications arriving regularly. The educational program had expanded to include workshops for adults interested in sustainable agriculture and traditional food production. Yet for all the growth and change, the core principles remained unaltered: respect for the bees and their natural processes, commitment to traditional methods, and a focus on quality over quantity. These were non-negotiable aspects of the Blackwell Farm approach, enshrined in both the collective's charter and the farm's daily operations. Harold's phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from James. "White House called. President loved our honey at the state dinner, requesting standing order for kitchen." Harold smiled, slipping the phone back into his pocket without responding. Good news could wait. The bees could not. He continued his morning inspection routine, moving methodically from hive to hive, checking for signs of health and productivity. This direct engagement with the insects remained his favorite part of each day, the quiet communion with creatures whose industry and organization had fascinated humans for thousands of years. As he worked, Harold reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 18 months. The farm had been transformed, yes, but so had he. The solitary farmer forced to contemplate surrender had become a reluctant entrepreneur, an educator, and the center of a growing community dedicated to traditional agriculture in a modern context. But perhaps the most meaningful transformation had been in his relationship with James. Father and son had found a new equilibrium, a partnership that honored their different strengths and perspectives while working toward shared goals. James would never be the farmer Harold had once hoped for. His talents and interests lay elsewhere, but he had found his own way back to the land and the family legacy, contributing in ways Harold could never have managed alone. As Harold closed the final hive of his morning inspection, He heard the distant sound of children's voices, the school group, beginning their tour of the farm. Soon they would reach the observation area near the bee yard, where Harold would demonstrate basic beekeeping techniques and explain the vital role of pollinators in the food system. Some of the children would be bored, some frightened of the bees, some merely going through the motions of a school field trip. But others would be genuinely fascinated, their young minds opening to the complexity and wonder of the natural world. And perhaps one or two might feel the stirring of a deeper connection, the beginning of a lifetime relationship with the land and its processes. That possibility alone made the educational aspect of the farm worthwhile. In a world increasingly disconnected from the sources of its food, creating such connections mattered more than ever. It was, Harold had come to believe, as important to the farm's purpose as producing honey itself. He began walking toward the visitor center, where the school group would be gathering for their introduction to Blackwell Farm. As he approached, he could see Angela welcoming the children and their teachers, her natural warmth and enthusiasm setting the tone for their visit. Harold paused for a moment, taking in the scene before him, the renovated buildings, the flourishing bee yard, the expanded wildflower meadow, the faces of visitors eager to learn about traditional honey production. So much had changed since that summer day when a stranger had stopped to taste his honey. So much had been preserved. Marjorie would have loved this version of the farm, he thought. She would have delighted in the children's visits, in James's renewed connection to his heritage, in the way the bees had indeed found a way to save them, just as she had predicted they might. Harold smiled at the memory of his wife, feeling her presence in the beauty and harmony of the farm she had helped shape. Then he straightened his shoulders and continued walking toward the waiting group, ready to share the story of Blackwell Farm honey with yet another audience, a story that had become, unexpectedly but undeniably, his own. As he approached the gathering of excited children, Harold felt a sense of contentment that had once seemed impossibly out of reach. The farm would continue, the traditions would be preserved, the work that mattered would go on. Not despite change, but alongside its evolution without abandonment, progress without loss. "Good morning, everyone," he called out, smiling at the sea of young faces. "Welcome to Blackwell Farm. We have quite a story to share with you today." And as the children clustered around him, eyes wide with curiosity, Harold began to tell it the tale of struggling bees and a struggling farmer, of wildflowers and weather patterns, of perseverance and unexpected opportunity. It was a story about honey, yes, but also about something larger. The sweet, surprising ways in which lives could be transformed when authenticity was recognized and valued for the rare treasure it truly was.